Good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight with the murder trial of Derek Chauvin, with testimony ending on a tumultuous day for our country. When our doubts about whether policing is just irreconcilably broken when it comes to people of color have no choice but to crystallize, with two other cases of people being killed by police coming more and more into focus. Former Brooklyn Center police officer Kim Potter made her first court appearance today, 4 days after she shot and killed 20-year-old Daunte Wright. And in Chicago, authorities released body camera video that shows a 13-year-old boy being shot and killed by a police officer on March 29th. We'll have more on those stories coming up. But first, a big day in the Chauvin trial, a trial that many of you have been closely following on live national TV for more than 2 weeks. The 45 witnesses, from police officers to forensic scientists to George Floyd's own brother, all culminated today with the defense resting its case after just 2 days of testimony, without putting Chauvin himself on the stand. We did hear from him for the first time today, however, in a pre-trial hearing in which he availed himself of his Fifth Amendment rights.
Have you made a decision today whether you intend to testify or whether you intend to invoke your Fifth Amendment privilege?
I will invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege today.
You may also recall from yesterday, defense witness Dr. David Fowler, a forensic pathologist who was paid to blame everything other than Derek Chauvin for the death of George Floyd, including carbon monoxide poisoning. A frankly bizarre theory stemming from Floyd's face pointing toward an exhaust pipe of a gas-electric hybrid police squad car. For the record, Fowler had no data on how much carbon monoxide was actually being released, or even if the car was on. Well, today, the prosecution called one of its most impactful witnesses, pulmonologist Dr. Martin Tobin, to refute this so-called expert's claim.
The protein in the blood that carries the oxygen, how much of that hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen? And we know in Mr. Floyd that it was 98% saturated.
Does that tell us anything whatsoever about what the carbon monoxide content could have been at a maximum?
Yes, it does. It tells us that if the hemoglobin is saturated at 98%, it tells you all there was for everything else is 2%. And so the maximum amount of carbon monoxide would be 2%.
Was at most 2%?
At most 2%.
Normal.
Which is normal.
Again, Dr. Martin Tobin, a lung and critical care expert, testifying that car exhaust did not kill George Floyd. But you knew that already. Closing arguments are set for Monday, after which the jury will be sequestered during deliberations. We could see a verdict as soon as next week. And joining me now is MSNBC correspondent Shaquille Brewster, who's been following the story in Minneapolis. So I want to get both sides of this piece for our viewers tonight, Shaq. The case itself, your observations of just how things are playing out at this point.
Well, Joy, we really watched this case wrap up fairly quickly. We walked into today expecting to hear from more witnesses. We know that there was a witness that was slated for yesterday who we thought was going to be the first witness today. Instead, we saw that surprise moment where we heard Derek Chauvin's voice in the courtroom for the very first time. It was not his testimony. It was instead him saying that he was going to invoke his Fifth Amendment protections and not testify. We also heard some back and forth over that claim that we heard from Dr. Fowler yesterday, the defense's witness, who said and suggested that George Floyd died. One of the reasons, at least, was carbon monoxide poisoning. The defense kept on with that claim, and we heard the prosecution bring back that rebuttal witness, Dr. Tobin, to wrap up. It was a quick direct examination, a quick cross-examination, but it really set and laid through to the end the two sides of this argument. You have the defense pointing to George Floyd's heart condition and pointing to his drug use and saying that was the reason why he died, while the prosecution has spent weeks saying that it was the use of force and the knee on George Floyd's neck and upper back. That is what led to George Floyd's death. So now this will be in the hands of the jury. What we know is to come is closing arguments will take place on Monday. After that, the jury will get the jury instructions. That's something that the prosecution and the defense, they're still arguing about right now. They had a late afternoon court hearing about what exactly they want included in those instructions, and then it'll be up to the jury. The judge warned the jury earlier today that they should pack a bag, and, you know, it's up to them how long they take to deliberate. But after this long long trial, it'll be in their hands at some point next week, Joy.
Yeah, I don't envy them. This is a pretty big burden for them to have to carry. Let's talk about the community, because you've been out and about. I've been watching your great reporting just in and around the Minneapolis area. How are people reacting to the developments as they're going on?
You know, it's really a mix. I mean, first, it's hard to miss the idea that this trial is happening and that a verdict is coming up soon. I mean, look behind me. You see the armored vehicles, the fencing. If you go around the downtown area, you see a lot of businesses boarded up. That has only expanded. We know thousands of National Guard troops are deployed in this area, not only Minneapolis, but of course, Brooklyn Center with the shooting of Daunte Wright. So you have that tension there, but it also is important to note that many people that I talked to, people who I met during the protests last summer, they are avoiding this. They have not been paying attention to the trial. They say it just brings them more trauma. So they know that a verdict is coming. They know that there will be that decision and some sort of reaction to it. But you have a mix of people who are laser focused on it and people who are trying their best to avoid the reality.
Yeah, you can certainly understand that, because it's a lot. It's a lot right now. Shaquille Brewster. Shaq, you've been doing a great job.
Right.
Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you.
And joining me now, cheers. Joining me now is MSNBC legal contributor Katie Fang and Jason Johnson, professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University. So, Katie, I think for every lawyer and former and current prosecutor, today was a tense day to watch the prosecution have to walk a pretty narrow tightrope because there was a mistrial floated by the judge. Can you just walk us through what happened today and what Prosecutor Blackwell had to pull off with Dr. Chauvin?
Yeah, so most of the legal drama, Joy, today happened behind the scenes and outside the presence of the jury. There was a late disclosed lab report that Dr. Andrew Baker, the Hennepin County medical examiner who conducted the only autopsy of George Floyd, within that late produced lab result was actual information about carbon monoxide, which we had heard about from Dr. Fowler for the very first time when he took the stand on behalf of the defense yesterday. But the reason why it created drama was the judge said that this late disclosure caused too much prejudice for the defense and excluded the use of that lab result. And so the judge said to Mr. Blackwell on behalf of the prosecution, make sure that Dr. Tobin, when he's called as the rebuttal witness, doesn't mention it. If I hear it and the jury hears it, it's a mistrial. So you can imagine after weeks and dozens of witnesses how nervous we all were. But actually, it was a win for the prosecution. Why? Because normally you have the prosecution's case, the defense's case, and then the defense rests its case and the jury gets to deliberate. The state got to end the trial in terms of the presentation of the facts and the evidence on a high note with the rebuttal witness of Dr. Tobin. And so the jury got to see the very likable, very relatable, very understandable Dr. Tobin say very clearly that there was 2% capability of carbon monoxide in Mr. Floyd's blood. But also Mr. Blackwell said, you're not going to confuse the jury, right? Right, Dr. Fowler, right, Dr. Fowler? And so the jury was able to hear it. So again, no mistrial. Jury gets to deliberate starting on Monday, but they have to be sensitive to the fact that there was Daunte Wright's killer was in court today, Kim Potter, and that the release of the Chicago PD video of that poor 13-year-old boy, Adam Toledo, was released. And the jurors may or may not be aware of that right now, Joy.
And so the tension, Jason, around this, it couldn't be tighter, right? Because you've got multiple killings and people, just because they're in Minneapolis, doesn't mean they haven't heard about the Virginia take down of this Army officer or the case in Texas and all of these killings, and now a 13-year-old in Chicago. I just want to go through some polling, which, polling isn't everything, but we're going to use it tonight just to sort of set a stage here. Monmouth University did a poll and asked people what they think the impact on race relations would be of an acquittal if it were to happen. And it says if Chauvin is found not guilty of murder, 5% say it would be positive for race relations, 63% say it would be negative, 29% say it wouldn't even make a difference, which is sort of sad. When you break it down by partisanship, it's quite different. White Americans who are Democrats and independents and white Americans who are Republicans have very different views on this. 56% of white American Democrats and independents say bad for race relations. White Republicans don't seem to think so. So this trial, like everything else, is about our politics, Jason.
Yeah, first off, I want to know who this 5% is that think that Derek Chauvin getting off would be good for America. I'm just curious who those people are and if they work for Tucker. But here's the thing to remember, Joy, and I've said this all along. Demographics are destiny, right? The makeup of jury pools has so much to do with whether or not we're going to get the justice we want. And that's how America sort of looks at these kinds of issues. It is very clear that what's happening in this trial today can't be separated from what everyone has seen all along. We've had 2 additional shootings come out since this trial began. I think at this point, it's impossible for Americans to look at what's happening with Derek Chauvin and just say, oh, this is an isolated incident. I can't compare it to everything else. But here's, I think, the most dangerous thing, Joy. And I've said all along, look, it's a very hard case for the defense. I think Chauvin will probably end up being convicted. But he is not just the sacrificial lamb that American policing can use to say this is a bad apple and avoid the longer conversation. And that's what my concern is. Even the people who say that his conviction will help race relations, if nothing changes in policing, then he was just a scapegoat. It was a makeup call for a much larger problem.
Yeah, and when Pat Robertson comes out and says, this is terrible. I got the 2 different weapons here.
Right.
You should have been able to tell the difference. This is terrible. We need to start hiring better quality of cops. Like, when Pat Robertson is going there, let me very quickly, I don't know if we have the time, but I just want to play for our audience. We may not have time to have our guests react to it. But here are just Derek Chauvin's former colleagues, just the cops who testified. Take a listen.
Right. Is this an MPD-trained neck restraint?
No, sir.
Has it ever been?
Not to my neck restraint, no, sir.
I don't know what kind of improvised position that is. So that's not what we train.
All right.
Yeah.
And as part of your training within the Minneapolis Police Department policies, is there an obligation to provide medical intervention when necessary?
Absolutely. Is it your belief then that this particular form of restraint, if that's what we'll call it, in fact violates departmental policy?
I absolutely agree that violates our policy.
And ladies and gentlemen, I have never seen a cop, let alone that many police officers, testify against a fellow police officer. If Derek Chauvin is convicted, it will be because of that and because of Mr. Tobin, who I want to take a class from. Katie Fang and Jason Johnson, I want to take a class with both of y'all, too, as well, because you guys are great professors as well.